Coalition MPs back in Parliament House today, and happy to be so. The new minister will be sworn in tomorrow. Let me bring in Peter Hartcher, political editor with the Sydney Morning Herald. Peter, looking at this new ministry that will be sworn in tomorrow, what do you think it tells us about Scott Morrison's priorities, his plan for the, I guess, coming, the rest of this year and the rest of this term?
Starting on its broadest appearance, David, the historic breakthrough in, for the first time, appointing an Indigenous person to the cabinet, that will be remembered. That's a historic moment for Morrison and for Australia. It's taken 2.5 centuries to show that Indigenous people can operate at every level, but it's happened. So that's important. And likewise, that Morrison has retained record high number of women on his front bench. These are gestures towards both a broadening of the coalition's appeal and a unifying of the country. So that's an important first step. The other thing I'd say is that less novel and more time-honoured is the concept of rewarding your mates, and the most spectacular there has been the rehabilitation of Stuart Robert, who was dispatched to the backbench in disgrace, but now comes roaring back into the cabinet, no less. But it's a two-edged sword, David, because he gets a big reward, but he also has a tremendous pressure on both of the tasks.
Well, I was going to say, this has got to be one of the most difficult tasks in the ministry, fixing the NDIS.
Yes. Yeah, so he's got, and they're both big. I mean, and they're both really consequential. One is the NDIS, which Morrison has said is close to his heart and repeatedly emphasised his priority. So that's a whole new system and a whole new entitlement and a whole new... and it's also a world first. So there isn't any existing model, and this has to be worked out. So that's a big one. It's a tough one. There's all sorts of teething problems, and Stuart Roberts' job is to fix that. He's also got the job of creating a new interface, if you like, with the consumers of federal government services. Again, that's a big and complex one that he's going to have to take a whole of government approach to. So the reward's there, but the pressure's on.
Anthony Albanese confirmed yesterday as the Labor leader, and today's gone straight to Longman. Peter, this, I guess, is a fairly sensible move. Queensland is where he needs to start rebuilding. What is that going to take for Labor to actually win back the lost votes, but also those who just haven't been with Labor for a long time? They only won, 1 in 4 Queenslanders.
Well, he's starting with a conciliation visit, I suppose, but a couple of the things he said today are also important precursors, if you like, of at least being noticed or listened to, because that's ultimately what he's got to achieve, because nobody's really listening to date. And that is, first of all, he's stepped back from the Adani mine question, and he's very clearly said this is no longer a matter for a federal involvement. In other words, I'm out of this. It's going to run, let it run. And I'm not going to try and tamper with it or try and delay it any further. So that's
interesting you point that out, Peter, because a lot of people have said he's been dodging this, he's not giving an answer. But today, you're right, he's basically said the federal approval is done. It's now up to those final state approvals and then the company to decide whether it stacks up for them financially. So he's not putting up any resistance to it.
Not at all. He's been completely hands-off. If you just listen to what he said today, it was very clear. As you say, he said there's a private sector procedure. It's not a government project. Federal approvals have been given under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act. All federal approvals have been given twice. There's no federal involvement anymore. And it's now up to the Queensland government, and they're getting on with their own accelerated program of approvals, as he said.
Look, I guess what some want him to do is actually say, you know, I want this mine. I'm keen to see it go ahead. He's not doing that.
Well, he's not doing that, no. But he's removed the ambiguity about whether Labor has any intention of interfering, stopping, delaying. That's a pretty big first step. He's essentially saying, hands off. I'm not going to touch this or try and mess with this. And maybe at some later date he would think about going further. But that's an important prerequisite. And the other thing I thought he said today, David, that was important was acknowledging that Queenslanders don't like, Southerners, especially Southern socialists, coming and dictating to them about how they should be doing things. And that was a pretty important statement too. Albanese will have to spend a lot of time there and over the next few years and get the Queenslanders to think of him as one of their own, though, rather than as some alien socialist visiting. So, Day
They were
one,
important points.
first
No,
visit,
indeed.
first step.
Yeah.
Good as you get.
No,
really.
exactly. I want to get your thoughts too, finally here, Peter, on the Prime Minister. He's off to Honiara, to the Solomon Islands on Sunday, his first post-election trip, and then he'll be over to London for the D-Day commemorations there. But look, making the first stop, the Solomon Islands, I think significant. We saw, as in his early time as Prime Minister, this sort of Pacific pivot or Pacific push. It's been a while since we've talked about it, but things haven't really changed in terms of the strategic competition with China in the Pacific, have they?
No, they've intensified and will continue to intensify. And in that vein, Scott Morrison is responding to the issue of our time, which is the challenge that we are being posed by China, by the Chinese Communist Party, and its ambitions, its territorial ambitions, and its ambitions to secure the Pacific as part of its sphere of influence. The other thing that's happened, though, David, just in the last month, is that there were serious outbreaks of violence and protests on the street in the Solomons last month for the first time on any scale since the Ramsay mission was wound up. So this is suggesting that the moment you look away, the moment Australia looks away, and the moment the Ramsay operation walked away and wiped its hands of the Solomons is again tending to where it was, which is as a failed state. And this is just one of the many Pacific Island countries that are in a severe state of decay, really. So it's timely that Morrison's stepping up for the livelihood and the protection of those countries themselves. And preventative diplomacy is always better than having to go in later with a big military stabilisation. But at the back of that is, yes, the Chinese are there looking for any opportunity to assert themselves diplomatically and militarily.